Question. If your doctor only treated your symptoms and never ran a diagnostic, never checked your blood work, never looked at your history, would you trust that treatment plan? Of course not. But that's exactly what we've been doing with food insecurity in this country. We keep handing out food without ever diagnosing why the food disappeared in the first place. I'm Valika Brown, CEO and founder of eRoadmap and HydroHub. And today, I want to walk you through step one of the MAPS framework, what we call Map the System. This is the diagnostic, and I promise you, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So buckle up. Food desert versus food apartheid. First, let's get the language right. We've been calling these communities food deserts as if it's a weather pattern, like the food just evaporated. But deserts are natural. What happened to these communities was not natural. The MAPS framework calls it what it is, food apartheid. That word matters because it tells you something a desert never will, that someone made decisions that created this. Specific policies, specific investments that went somewhere else. When you change the language, you change what you're looking for, and that's what step one is about. Traditional interventions treat hunger like a temporary scarcity issue. If we just hand out enough food, the problem goes away. The MAPS framework says no. Hunger is a policy outcome of historic community disinvestment. So the solution isn't just providing food, it's reorganizing the financial and political resources that created the gap in the first place. That's why phase one of the MAPS framework is what we call strategic alignment, the invisible work underground. Before you plant infrastructure, you have to prepare the soil. Phase one focuses on two critical steps: map the system, understanding the root causes, and align power and capital, preparing the resources. Today, we're focused on step one, map the system. The goal is to reveal hunger as a policy outcome of historic community disinvestment patterns. This is about auditing the landscape. It's not just about where food isn't. It's about identifying the policies, zoning, lending, transit that created the gap. The traditional approach counts food deserts on a map and treats symptoms. Step one traces policy decisions, documents the disinvestments, and creates a roadmap because we cannot fix what we do not measure. So what are we looking for? Three patterns of disinvestment: zoning and land use, how policy restricts healthy food retail, capital access, the barriers to local business ownership, and infrastructure decay, the physical erosion of community assets. Each one is an excavation. Let's dig in. The first excavation is zoning and land use. Here's something most people don't realize. In many cities across this country, the zoning code will greenlight a liquor store or a fast food chain in a low-income neighborhood with a simple permit. But if you want to open a farmer's market or a community garden in that same neighborhood, now you often need a conditional use permit. That's lawyers, fees, public hearings, months of waiting. Baltimore had to rewrite its entire zoning code just to allow small grocery stores and community gardens in residential areas. Minneapolis had to pass a specific ordinance requiring food retailers to carry basic healthy items. These aren't accidents. The code was written to make unhealthy food easy and healthy food hard. Step one says find those codes, document them, name them. The second excavation is capital access. Research has consistently shown that two identical loan applications, same credit score, same business plan, one from a minority entrepreneur, one from a white entrepreneur, receive vastly different approval rates, interest terms, and all of this is in the same city. It's not anecdotal. This is exposed through federal audits and lending pattern analysis over decades. Now, think about what that means for community food infrastructure. You can't build a community owned grocery store if the community can't access capital. You can't launch a food co op if the bank won't lend to you. Mapping the capital landscape exposes this. It transforms banks won't lend here from something people accept into a specific addressable obstacle. The third excavation is infrastructure decay. In New Orleans, North Claiborne Avenue was once called the main street of Black New Orleans, lined with oak trees, grocery stores, restaurants, a theater. Black owned businesses up and down that entire corridor. Then in 1968, the day after Mardi Gras, demolition began. They ripped out those oak trees and built the I-10 expressway right on top of it. Dozens of businesses destroyed. In Syracuse, New York, the 15th Ward was a thriving Black community, home to hundreds of Black owned businesses, churches, homes, until Interstate 81 was built directly through it in the 1960s. Families lost homes and businesses throughout eminent domain. The neighborhood was wiped off the map, and that wasn't unique. The U.S. Department of Transportation estimates that more than 475,000 households were displaced nationwide by federal highway construction. Step one says go back. Find out what your community had 30, 40, 50 years ago. Because understanding what was taken reveals what needs to be rebuilt. And it builds the case that restoration, not charity, is what's owed. Let's talk about practical application, the 90-day sprint. Now, some of you are thinking, okay, this sounds important, but how do I actually do this? That's why step one includes a 90-day mapping sprint. Weeks 1 through 4, historical research. Go to the archives, interview elders and longtime residents. Build the timeline of when disinvestment began and what triggered it. People in your community already know the story. They just haven't been asked to tell it in a way that becomes evidence. Weeks 5 through 8, current state analysis. Pull the zoning codes, analyze lending patterns, assess what's left of the physical infrastructure. This is where you may discover that the code requires a conditional use permit for a community garden, but not a dollar store. Weeks 9 through 12, synthesis. Visualize the data. Identify the barriers. Start partnership conversations. By the end, you have a comprehensive state of food apartheid report, a diagnostic document that is now your foundation. You don't need a PhD to do this. You need a committed team, 90 days, and the willingness to look at what's been hidden in plain sight. And still, some of you all are thinking, Valika, we don't have time for a 90-day project. People are hungry now. Let's just build something. I hear you. But let me tell you what happens when you skip this step. You fall into what I call the infrastructure trap. Well-meaning organizations try to build before they map. They launch a community grocery store and then discover the zoning board won't approve it. They open a food hub and it can't survive the next election cycle because it was built on a political relationship, not a structural foundation. The initiative dies. The community loses trust. And the next person who comes along with a good idea has an even harder time getting people to believe in it. And that's the second piece, the trust factor, which is huge. Trust is everything. When you skip the mapping process, you're telling the community, we already know what you need. But communities that have been studied, surveyed, and abandoned for decades don't respond to that. What builds trust is doing the work with the community, documenting what they already know to be true, validating lived experience with evidence. That's not just good research, that's shared ownership. Step one proves that communities aren't broken, systems are broken, and you can't fix a system you have not first mapped. Now, let's talk a little bit about bridging the gap. And here's what makes this framework different from a research project. Once you've mapped the system, every vague complaint becomes a specific target. We need more food access becomes we need to change section 23.4 of the zoning code. Banks won't lend here becomes we need a community development credit union. There's nowhere to build becomes we need to acquire these 3 parcels through a land trust. That's the power of mapping. You stop begging for solutions and start engineering them. You walk into a room with a city council member, a hospital system, or a funder, and you don't have a story. You now have a case. So in closing, step 1 is the invisible work. It's underground. It's not glamorous by any means. But here's what I've learned building eRoadmap over the last 13 years. You cannot have the canopy without the roots. Communities aren't broken. Systems are broken. And step 1 proves it with evidence, with data, and with the lived experience of the people who've always known the truth. Deep roots take time, but they ensure survival. This was just step 1 of our 4-step system. If you're willing to partner and do the work together, great things can happen. I encourage you to start the journey with the MAPS framework.